The cold was the first thing Marcus Cole felt when his mind started to wake up from the long sleep. His body had been frozen for months inside the emergency pod, and now something was different. Something had changed around him, and his brain was slowly coming back to life after the cryogenic freeze that had kept him alive in the empty darkness of space. He could not open his eyes yet, because his muscles were still too weak and his eyelids felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds each, but he could feel things. Warm breath was hitting his face in slow, steady waves, like someone was breathing right next to him, right on top of him actually, and there was weight pressing down on his chest and his legs. Heavy, warm weight that should not be there. The emergency pod was designed for one person only, and Marcus knew he had been alone when the pod ejected from the burning ship. He remembered the fire and the explosions and the screaming alarms as the UES Prometheus broke apart in the darkness of uncharted space. He remembered hitting the emergency release and feeling the pod shoot away from the dying ship like a bullet fired into the void. He remembered the cold embrace of cryosleep, taking him down into darkness. But he did not remember anyone else being in the pod with him. So what was breathing on him right now? Marcus forced his eyes to open, and the world came into focus slowly like a camera adjusting its lens. Golden eyes were staring at him from very close. So close that he could see his own reflection in them, and the eyes belonged to a face that was definitely not human. Scales covered the face, black as obsidian and shining with an inner heat, and small horns curved back from the forehead, and thin wisps of smoke curled up from nostrils that flared with each warm breath. A dragon. Marcus was looking at a dragon. His military training kicked in immediately, and his brain started classifying the threat, measuring the distance, calculating escape routes. But then he noticed something that made him stop. The dragon was small. It was about the size of a large dog, and it was curled up on his chest with its wings folded tight against its body and its tail wrapped around itself. And it was looking at him with those golden eyes that held no anger or hunger or threat. It looked curious. It looked hopeful. It chirped at him, a small musical sound that was completely wrong, coming from a creature with fangs and claws and smoke coming out of its nose. Then Marcus felt the weight on his legs shift, and he looked down to see two more dragons, just as small as the first one, curled up on top of him like cats seeking warmth. 3 little dragons had been sleeping on him. 3 little dragons had been waiting for him to wake up. Marcus lay very still and tried to understand what was happening, because this was not in any of his training manuals, and this was not something the military had prepared him for. He was a soldier, a commander, a man who had led troops into battle on 3 different planets, but nobody had ever taught him what to do when baby dragons decided to use him as a bed. The pod's internal display flickered to life and showed him data that made his situation more clear. He had crashed on a moon called Pyria 7 in a system that had no name on human star charts. The atmosphere was breathable but thin. The temperature outside was currently negative 180 degrees, and the thermal sensors showed that 3 heat signatures had been pressed against the outside of his pod for the past 6 days. 6 days. These little dragons had been curled around his pod for 6 days, sharing their body heat, keeping the metal warm, keeping him alive while the frozen night of this hostile moon tried to kill him. Without them, he would have died. The pod's heating system had been damaged in the crash, and without external heat, his cryogenic sleep would have become permanent, his body freezing solid in the endless cold. But these 3 small creatures had saved him. They had found his pod, and they had wrapped themselves around it, and they had waited and waited and waited for the strange being inside to wake up. Why Marcus did not know, but as he lay there with warm dragon weight pressing him down and golden eyes watching him with something that looked almost like hope, he felt something shift inside his chest. Largest of the 3 dragons chirped again, and then did something that surprised Marcus more than anything else. It spoke not words exactly, but sounds that were trying to be words, sounds that had the shape of language, even if they did not have the meaning yet. The dragon was trying to communicate with him. Marcus slowly raised one hand, and the three dragons tensed but did not run, did not attack, did not even bare their fangs. They just watched. He brought his hand to the head of the largest dragon and touched the warm scales gently. The dragon made a sound like a purr, mixed with a crackle of fire, and pressed its head into his palm. "Hey there," Marcus said, and his voice came out rough and broken from months of not being used. "Hey, little guy." The dragon chirped again, and the other two lifted their heads and added their own sounds to the conversation. A chorus of musical notes that bounced around the inside of the pod. Marcus looked at the display again and saw more data that painted a grim picture. His emergency rations would last maybe 2 months if he stretched them. His water recycler was functioning, but barely. His communication beacon was damaged and might take months to repair. He was stranded on a frozen moon in uncharted space, with no rescue coming and no way to call for help. But he was alive, and he was not alone. The three little dragons had made sure of that. Marcus did not know why they had saved him, or what they wanted from him, or what would happen next. But as he lay there in the crash pod with 3 warm bodies pressed against him, and 6 golden eyes watching him with trust and curiosity and something that looked almost like love, he made a decision. Whatever these creatures were, whatever this moon held, whatever challenges waited for him outside the pod, he would face them, he would survive, and he would take care of these 3 little dragons who had taken care of him. "Okay," he said softly, and the dragons perked up at the sound of his voice. "Okay, boys. Looks like we are in this together." The largest dragon chirped happily, and the other 2 added their voices, and the sound filled the pod with warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. Marcus Cole had been a commander of soldiers, a leader of men, a warrior who had faced death on distant worlds. Now he was something else. Now he was a father to dragons, and somehow that felt more important than anything he had ever done before. The 3 little dragons led Marcus across the frozen, volcanic plains of Pyria 7, and he followed them, because he had no better plan, and because they seemed to know exactly where they were going. He had named them already because humans needed names for things they cared about, and he found himself caring about these strange, small creatures more than he expected. The largest one was Ember, because his scales had tiny flecks of orange mixed with the black like dying coals in a fire. The middle one was Ash, because his scales were darker than the others, with streaks of gray running through them like wood that had burned down to nothing. The smallest one was Cinder, because he was the color of charcoal, and because he stayed close to his brothers like a spark that needed protection from the wind. They moved across the landscape in a strange little parade, with the dragons bounding ahead and then circling back to make sure Marcus was still following the volcanic rock beneath his feet. It was warm despite the freezing air, and steam rose from cracks in the ground, creating a fog that swirled around them. Like ghosts, Marcus had salvaged what he could from the pod before leaving it behind. He had his emergency pack with rations and water and medical supplies, and he had his combat knife and his thermal blanket, and a few tools that might prove useful. It was not much, but it was something. Dragons led him toward a massive caldera in the distance, a dormant volcano that rose from the plain like a sleeping giant. And as they got closer, Marcus could see the dark mouth of a cave system opening in the rock face. This was where the dragons lived. This was home. They entered the caves, and the temperature rose immediately as the volcanic heat trapped inside pushed back against the frozen air outside. The tunnels twisted and turned, and Marcus had to duck and crawl in some places, but the dragons moved through the darkness with confidence, their bodies giving off just enough heat glow to light the way. Then they reached the central chamber, and Marcus stopped walking because he could not make his legs move anymore. Dragons filled the chamber, adult dragons, massive and beautiful, their bodies stretched out on the warm stone floor like they were sleeping. But they were not sleeping. Marcus and seen death enough times to recognize it. The adult dragons were dead. All 12 of them, their great bodies cold and still despite the heat of the cave. Their scales had lost all color and turned gray and brittle like old paper, and strange crystalline growths erupted from their hides in clusters of sharp white spines. Some kind of infection, some kind of plague. Marcus walked slowly through the chamber and looked at each body and tried to understand what had happened here. Dragons had been healthy once. He could tell from the size of them and the structure of their bones. But something had invaded their bodies and spread through the colony and killed them one by one. The 3 little ones pressed against his legs and made sounds that broke his heart. They were crying. Dragons could cry, it turned out, and the sound they made was worse than anything Marcus had ever heard on any battlefield. These 3 small creatures had watched their entire family die. They had watched their parents and their aunts and their uncles and everyone they had ever known fall to this disease and stop moving and grow cold, and then they had been alone on a frozen moon with no one to teach them how to survive. No one to show them how to hunt or fly or do any of the things that dragons needed to do. They should have died too. Young ones like them could not survive without adults to care for them, could not regulate their body temperature, could not find food, could not protect themselves from the dangers of this hostile world. But they had found the crash pod. They had found the strange creature inside it, the creature that was warm and alive and different from anything they had ever seen. And they had decided to save him, maybe because they needed someone to save, maybe because saving him gave them a reason to keep going when everything else had been taken away. Marcus knelt down on the warm stone floor, and the 3 dragons immediately climbed onto him. Ember wrapped around his shoulders and pressed his head against Marcus's neck. Ash curled up in his lap and made that crying sound again. Softer now, but still so sad. Cinder, the smallest, pushed himself under Marcus's arm and hid there like he was trying to disappear. Marcus held them all and let them grieve. He did not know what to say, because what words could possibly help in a moment like this? What comfort could he offer to creatures who had lost everything? But he could be here. He could be warm and solid and present. Could be the thing they held on to when the world had taken everything else away. "I am sorry," he whispered, and the words felt small and useless, but he said them anyway. "I am so sorry this happened to you." Ember made a sound against his neck that might have been acknowledgement or might have been just more grief. "I cannot bring them back," Marcus continued, and his voice was rough with emotion he had not expected to feel. "I cannot fix what happened, and I cannot make the pain go away." He paused and tightened his arms around the 3 small bodies pressed against him. "But I am here now, and I am not going anywhere, and I will take care of you for as long as I am alive." The dragons did not understand all of his words. Not yet, but they understood his tone, and they understood his warmth, and they understood that this strange 2-legged creature was making them a promise. Marcus looked around the chamber at the bodies of the adult dragons and made his own silent promise to them as well. He would keep their children safe. He would teach them and protect them and give them everything he had. He was not a dragon, and he was not their real family, but he was what they had, and he would be enough. He had to be enough. 3 little dragons eventually stopped crying and fell asleep against him, exhausted from grief and relief and the simple comfort of being held. Marcus sat in the chamber of the dead and held the living and planned for the future. He would need to find food and water, and he would need to learn what dragons ate, and he would need to make this cave into a real home. He would need to be a father to 3 alien creatures on a hostile moon millions of miles from any other human being. It was an impossible task, but Marcus Cole had never believed in impossible. He believed in doing the next thing that needed to be done, and then the next thing after that, and then the next thing after that, until somehow the impossible became possible. The dragons slept, and Marcus held them, and outside the frozen wind howled across the Volcanic plains tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight there was warmth and there was trust, and there was the beginning of something that felt like family, that was enough for now. The months that followed were the hardest of Marcus Cole's life, and also the most meaningful. Every day brought new challenges and new lessons and new moments that reminded him why he had chosen to stay alive. On this frozen volcanic moon, the dragons needed to eat, and Marcus had no idea what dragons ate. He watched them carefully in those first weeks, following them around the cave system and the volcanic plains outside, taking notes in his head about what they sniffed at and what they tried to taste. They needed minerals, he discovered. Volcanic minerals that came from the thermal vents scattered across the landscape. The crystals that grew near the hottest vents seemed to be their main food source. Strange glowing formations that pulsed with heat and energy. Marcus learned to harvest them with his bare hands because he had no tools designed for this work. The crystals were hot, sometimes burning hot, and his palms became covered with scars and calluses as the weeks turned into months, but the dragons ate well and grew stronger, and that was all that mattered. Nights were the most dangerous time. The temperature on Period 7 dropped to levels that would kill an unprotected human in minutes, and the young dragons could not regulate their body heat the way adults could. Without the warmth of their parents, they would freeze, their small bodies unable to generate enough heat to survive the long dark hours. Marcus solved this problem the only way he could. He gathered his emergency thermal blankets and lined a small chamber deep in the cave system, and every night he curled up with the 3 dragons pressed against him, sharing body heat, keeping each other alive. It became a ritual, a sacred time when all 4 of them lay tangled together at a pile of scales and skin and warm breath. Ember always claimed the spot on Marcus's chest, his head tucked under the human's chin, ash wrapped around his legs like a scaly blanket. Cinder, still the smallest, squeezed himself against Marcus's side and made small contented sounds as sleep took him. Marcus would lie awake sometimes and listen to the 3 of them breathing and feel something expanding in his chest, something he had not felt since he was a young man with a family of his own. Before the wars and the distance and the slow erosion of everything he had once loved, this was his family. Now these 3 strange alien creatures who depended on him completely, and he would die before he let anything happen to them. The dragons were intelligent in ways that surprised Marcus more every day. Ember was the first to start mimicking human speech, his dragon vocal cords struggling to form sounds they were never designed to make. The first word he spoke clearly was Marcus, and the sound of his own name coming from a dragon's mouth made Marcus's eyes burn with tears he refused to let fall. Within weeks, Ember had a vocabulary of 50 words. Within months, he was forming simple sentences, broken and strange but understandable. Marcus, go where? He would ask when the human headed out to gather minerals. Marcus. Hurt hands, he would say with concern when he saw fresh burns on the callous palms. Marcus family, he said one night as they lay in their sleeping pile. And that was the word he used most of all. The word that meant everything. Ash was different, quieter, and more thoughtful. And his intelligence showed in other ways. He solved puzzles. Marcus started leaving him challenges, arrangements of rocks that needed to be moved in specific patterns to reach a reward. And Ash figured them out faster every time. Eventually, Marcus had to make the puzzles so complex that they took him an hour to design, because Ash would solve anything simpler in minutes. The dragon had a mind that worked in ways Marcus could barely understand, seeing patterns and connections that were invisible to human eye. Cinder was the watcher. He observed everything with those golden eyes that seemed too big for his small face, and he learned by watching rather than by doing. He watched Marcus repair the water recycler, and the next day, Marcus found him poking at the emergency beacon with careful, precise movements. The little dragon had figured out how to turn it on. He had watched Marcus's hands for weeks and memorized the sequence of buttons and switches and movements. The beacon was still too damaged to send a proper signal, but the fact that Cinder had learned to operate it at all was remarkable. These were not just animals. They were not pets or creatures to be studied or catalogued. They were people, alien people with their own thoughts and feelings and dreams and fears, and they were learning from him every single day. But what surprised Marcus most was how much he was learning from them. He learned patience because young dragons did not understand human concepts of time and schedules. He learned gentleness because creatures with fangs and claws still needed soft touches and kind words. He learned to be present, truly present, because the dragons did not care about the past or the future, only about the moment they were living in right now. And he learned something about himself that he had forgotten during all the years of war and command and distance. He learned that he was capable of love, not the love he had felt for his human family, not the love of romance or blood relation, but something different and equally powerful, the love of a protector, the love of someone who would give everything to keep others safe, the love of a father. One day, Marcus was confronted by a predator, a massive creature that lived in the volcanic caves and hunted anything it could catch. The beast was 3 times his size, with too many legs and jaws that could crush stone. It had cornered him near one of the thermal vents, and the 3 dragons were behind him. Too young to fight, too scared to fly, Marcus had nothing but a sharpened piece of hull plating that he had turned into a makeshift blade. The predator charged, and Marcus did not run. He stepped forward and met the attack with his tiny weapon, and a scream that echoed through the caves. He fought like a madman, slashing and stabbing and refusing to give ground, even as the creature's claws opened wounds on his arms and chest. The dragons watched their human stand against a monster with nothing but will and love and absolute refusal to let them be hurt. In the end, the predator retreated, wounded and confused by this small, soft creature that would not die, would not flee, would not stop fighting. Marcus collapsed against the cave wall with blood running down his body, and the 3 dragons immediately swarmed over him, making sounds of distress and trying to help in any way they could. "I am okay," he told them, even though he was not sure if that was true. "I am okay. We are okay. We are all okay." Ember pressed his head against Marcus's chest and said a word that was new, a word he had never used before. "Hero," the dragon said, and Marcus did not know where he had learned it or what he thought it meant. But in that moment, bleeding and exhausted and surrounded by 3 small creatures who loved him more than anything in the universe, Marcus felt like maybe the word was true. Maybe he was a hero after all, not because he was strong or brave or special, but because he had chosen to stay when leaving would have been easier, because he had chosen to love when being alone would have been simpler, because he had chosen family when he had every excuse to choose himself. The dragons were learning what it meant to be human, and Marcus was learning what it meant to be alive. 347 days after Marcus Cole crashed on Period 7, the emergency beacon finally caught a signal he was working in the cave when Cinder came bounding toward him with excitement radiating from every scale on his small body. Little Dragon had been tinkering with the beacon again, a habit Marcus had encouraged because it kept Cinder busy and because the dragon seemed to genuinely enjoy the work. But this time, something was different. This time the beacon was blinking with a light that Marcus had never seen before, a steady pulse of green that meant one thing, and one thing only: contact. Someone was out there. Someone had heard the signal. Marcus ran to the beacon and checked the display. and his heart started pounding so hard, he thought it might break through his ribs. A ship had entered the system, a Galactic Union patrol vessel, a Valkyrie science ship conducting surveys of uncharted space. They would arrive in 6 hours, and Marcus would be rescued 6 hours, and he would leave this frozen moon and return to human civilization and sleep in a real bed and eat real food and see human faces again. He should have been happy. He should have been celebrating instead. He felt like someone had poured ice water into his stomach, and the cold was spreading through his whole body. The Valkyrie Marcus knew about the Valkyrie variant. And the human military knew about the Valkyrie because they were one of the oldest and most powerful species in the Galactic Union, and their policies shaped everything that happened in explored space. They were the ones who had created the Exotic Fauna Preservation Compact, and Marcus knew exactly what that compact meant for species like the dragons. When the Valkyrie found intelligent, uncontacted species, they preserved them. That was the official word. Preservation. But Marcus had read the reports, and he knew what it really meant. Species would be studied and cataloged, and samples would be taken, and then the individuals would be separated and sent to different facilities across the galaxy. Different research stations where they could be observed and analyzed and kept safe from external contamination. Kept safe. That was another word that did not mean what it sounded like. Compact species rarely thrived in those facilities. They survived technically. Their bodies kept alive by advanced alien medicine. But something in them broke when they were separated from their families and their homes and everything they had. Ever know Marcus had seen videos of compact species in those facilities, creatures with dead eyes and listless movements. Creatures that had given up on living, even though their hearts still beat. The 3 dragon brothers would be separated. Ember and Ash and Cinder would be taken to different facilities on different planets in different star systems. They would never see each other again. They would never see Marcus again. They would be alone. Truly alone, in ways that would destroy them. Marcus stood in front of the blinking beacon and felt the weight of the choice pressing down on him. Could do nothing and wait for rescue and return to his life and let the Valkyrie take the dragons. Could explain to the aliens that these creatures were intelligent and should be treated with respect, and maybe they would listen, and maybe they would. Not or he could do something else. The dragons found him still standing there an hour later, frozen in place like a statue, and they immediately knew something was wrong. Ember pressed against his leg and looked up at him with those golden eyes that held such complete trust. Marcus said, the dragon said, because his vocabulary had grown so much in the past months. Marcus afraid. Why afraid? Marcus knelt down and pulled all 3 of them into his arms and held them tight. Someone is coming, he said, and the words felt like stones in his mouth. A ship is coming to this moon, and they will find us, the dragons. Did not understand at first. Ash tilted his head in confusion, and Cinder made a questioning sound, and even Ember, with all his words, could not grasp what Marcus was trying to say. The beings on the ship will want to take you away. Marcus continued, and he had to force each word out because they hurt so much to speak. They will want to separate you and study you, and they will not let you stay together. Now the dragons understood. Fear flashed in their eyes. Real fear. The kind that came from understanding a threat that could not be fought or fled from. No, Ember said, and his voice was firm even though his body was trembling. No separate, no away. Family stay together. Family, Ash repeated, and it was one of the few words he spoke out loud. Family. Cinder just pressed himself tighter against Marcus and made a sound that was pure distress. Marcus held them and made his decision. It was not a hard choice in the end. It was not even really a choice at all. He was a soldier, and he had sworn oaths to his government and his species and his duty. But those oaths meant nothing compared to the 3 small creatures in his arms. Those oaths were abstract concepts, words on paper, promises made to people who had never saved his life or slept curled against him through frozen nights or called him family. These dragons were real. This love was real, and Marcus would not betray it for anything. "We are going to hide," he said, and his voice was steady now because the decision had been made and there was no going back. "We are going to take everything we can carry, and we are going to go deep into the caves, where they will not find us." The dragons looked at him with hope blooming in their eyes. "The ship people will look for me, but they will not look very hard, because they are not here for me. They are here to survey the system, and when they find the empty pod, they will think I died." Marcus smiled even though his heart was breaking because he was choosing to stay on this frozen moon forever, choosing to never see another human face or hear another human voice, choosing exile and isolation and eventual death. But he was also choosing family. "We will wait until they leave, and then we will come back and we will build a life here together. Just the four of us, for as long as we have." Ember made a sound that was half laugh and half sob and pressed his head against Marcus's chest. "Hero," the dragon said again, that word he had learned months ago. Marcus hero. "No," Marcus said, and he meant it. "I am just a man who loves his family." They worked quickly after that, gathering supplies and moving everything they would need to. Deeper cave system 3 kilometers away from the main chambers, Marcus disabled the beacon so it would stop transmitting and made sure to leave signs of damage that would explain why the signal had been weak and intermittent. He arranged the main cave to look abandoned, to look like no one had lived there in months, to look like whatever creature had crashed here had died long ago. The dragons helped with everything, understanding the importance of the work, even if they did not understand all the details. When the Valkyrie ship entered orbit 6 hours later, Marcus and his dragons were hidden deep beneath the volcanic rock, invisible to sensors and scanners. Just 4 heartbeats in the darkness, waiting for the danger to pass. Marcus held Cinder in his arms and felt Ember and Ash pressed against his sides and listened to the silence of the deep caves. Somewhere above them, alien beings were walking on the surface of the moon and looking for signs of life and finding nothing. Somewhere above them, his last chance at rescue was slipping away. And Marcus Cole smiled in the darkness because he had made the right choice, the only choice, the choice that made him human in all the ways that mattered. The Valkyrie Signs vessel stayed in orbit for 3 days before moving on to continue its survey of the uncharted system. Marcus and the dragons remained hidden in the deep caves, eating their stored supplies and sleeping in a pile and waiting for the danger to pass. When the ship finally left, Marcus climbed to the surface and looked up at the empty sky and felt something strange wash over him. Relief. He was relieved that rescue had failed. He was relieved that he was still stranded on this frozen moon with 3 small dragons who depended on him. He was relieved that he had chosen love over safety, family over survival, these 3 strange creatures over everything else in the universe. The official Valkyrie report, which Marcus would never read, but which would echo through human space for years to come, classified Commander Marcus Cole as was deceased, lost to the hostile environment of Pyria 7. No remains recovered. No signs of prolonged survival. Crashed escape pods showed evidence of significant damage, and the emergency beacon had clearly been malfunctioning, sending weak intermittent signals for nearly a year before finally reaching Valkyrie sensors. A tragedy, but not an unusual one. Space was vast and cold, and humans who ventured into uncharted territory sometimes did not come back. The file was closed, and Marcus Cole was listed among the honored dead, and life in the galaxy continued without him. But on Pyria 7, life was just beginning. The years that followed were good years, hard but good, filled with work and growth and love. Marcus built a real home in the caves, stone structures that kept the heat in and the cold out, rooms for sleeping and eating and living. He cultivated the mineral gardens near the thermal vents, learning which crystals grew fastest and which ones the dragons liked best, mapped every tunnel and every cave and every hidden corner of the volcanic system until he knew it better than he had ever known any place in his previous life, and he raised 3 dragons from frightened orphans into magnificent adults. Ember grew into a dragon the size of a horse. His black scales now streaked with brilliant orange, like rivers of fire flowing across dark stone. His vocabulary expanded to thousands of words, and his intelligence rivaled any human Marcus had ever known. He became a leader, calm and wise and always looking out for his brothers. Ash grew even larger than Ember. His body built for strength and power, but his mind remained his greatest asset. He learned to solve problems that Marcus could not even understand, seeing patterns in the volcanic activity that allowed him to predict eruptions days in advance, finding paths through the cave system that seemed to defy the laws of physics. He spoke rarely, but when he spoke, everyone listened. Cinder stayed the smallest of the 3, but his skills with technology grew beyond anything Marcus could have imagined. Little Dragon, who had learned to work the beacon as a child, became an adult who could repair and modify and even build machinery from salvaged parts and volcanic minerals. He created heating systems and water purifiers and eventually a communication array that could reach across half the planet. The dragons learned to fly. Truly fly, their wings carrying them across the volcanic plains and up into the thin atmosphere where the stars were visible even during the day. They learned to hunt the creatures that lived in the deep caves and on the frozen surface, predators that had once seemed terrifying but now fled at the sight of 3 adult dragons flying in formation. They learned everything Marcus could teach them, and then they learned more on their own, and through it all they remained a family. Every night they still slept together in a pile of scales and skin and warmth, even though the dragons were now so large that Marcus looked tiny curled up between them. Every morning they ate together and planned the day together and faced whatever challenges came together. Every moment they had was shared, because that was what family meant. That was what Marcus had taught them. That was what being human was all about. 23 years after Marcus Cole crashed on Pyria 7, a human exploration vessel finally entered the system. The UES Discovery was mapping uncharted space for potential colonization, looking for habitable worlds and valuable resources and signs of intelligent life. What they found on the volcanic moon was beyond anything they had expected. Structured stone buildings arranged around thermal vents in patterns that spoke of deliberate design and careful planning. Gardens of cultivated crystals glowing with inner fire, and dragons. 3 massive dragons who rose into the air as the human shuttle descended and flew toward the landing site with purpose and speed. Exploration team was terrified. They had weapons, but the weapons seemed pathetic against creatures of such size and obvious power. They prepared for attack, for death, for the end of their mission and their lives. But the dragons did not attack. The largest one, scales streaked with orange fire, landed in front of the shuttle and folded its wings and spoke. "Welcome," Ember said, his voice deep and resonant and unmistakably speaking human words. "You are family. All humans are family." The exploration team stared in shock as the dragon smiled, actually smiled, and gestured toward the largest stone structure. "Come," Ember continued, "someone has been waiting to meet you for a very long time." They followed the dragons, because what else could they do? And the walk through the settlement filled them with wonder. This was not a primitive camp or a desperate survival outpost. This was a home, a real home, built with care and love and decades of patient work. And standing in the doorway of the largest building was a man. He was old now, gray-haired and weathered by years of volcanic wind and thin atmosphere and hard labor. But his eyes were bright, and his smile was warm, and he looked at the exploration team like they were the most wonderful thing he had ever seen. "Took you long enough," Marcus Cole said, and his voice cracked with emotion he made no effort to hide. "Come inside. The boys have been waiting to meet more of their brother's people." The exploration team leader stepped forward with tears in her eyes because she knew this name. Everyone knew this name. The commander who had been lost to uncharted space more than 2 decades ago. "Commander Cole," she whispered. "We thought you were dead." "I know," Marcus said, and he reached out to touch the scales of Ember, who had moved to stand beside him. "I let you think that because it was the only way to keep my family safe." He told them the story over the following days. The whole incredible tale of his crash and rescue by 3 orphan dragons, and the choice he had made when the Valkyrie came. The exploration team listened with wonder and horror, and eventually understanding. They understood why he had hidden. They understood why he had given up rescue and human contact and everything else he had ever known. They understood because they were human, and humans understood love and sacrifice and the bonds of family that transcended blood and species and the cold equations of survival. The Galactic Union tried to intervene, of course. The Valkyrie demanded that the exotic fauna preservation compact be applied to the dragons of Period 7. That these clearly intelligent beings be taken into protective custody for their own good. But humans refused. Humanity had never signed the compact, and humanity was not going to start now. Not when their own lost commander stood beside 3 dragons, who called him father and spoke of humans as family. The dragons of Period 7 became the first alien species to be granted associate citizenship in the human coalition. With full rights and protections under human law, more dragons came in the following decades. Young ones who made the journey from other moons and other worlds where their kind had been hiding. From Valkyrie preservation, they came because they had heard the story of the human who had given up everything for 3 orphan children. They came because they wanted to be part of that family. To Marcus, Cole lived to be 97 years old. An ancient man surrounded by dragons who loved him and humans who honored him, and a legacy that would shape galactic politics for centuries to come. When he finally died peacefully in his sleep with Ember and Ash and Cinder curled around him one last time, the dragons did not grieve the way they had grieved for their original family. They celebrated. They flew into the sky and breathed fire at the stars and sang songs about their father who had taught them what family meant and what love could do, and what it truly meant to be human. The Valkyrie compact called what Marcus had done contamination. The dragons called it love and humanity. When they told this story to their children and their children's children for generations to come, just called it Tuesday because that was what humans did. They found family in the strangest places. They loved the unlovable and protected the vulnerable, and stood against the darkness with nothing but will and heart and the absolute refusal to let the ones they loved be hurt. That was the lesson Marcus Cole had taught 3 orphan dragons on a frozen volcanic moon. That was the lesson the dragons taught the galaxy, and that was why, centuries after a crashed escape pod brought a dying man to a world of fire and ice, dragons still spoke human words and called humanity their brothers, and never forgot the warmth of one man's arms around them on the coldest night of their lives. Family was not about blood or species, or the accident of birth. Family was about choice, and Marcus Cole had chosen well.